I think it's important to note here as we're talking about Jesus invading our present and kind of untangling our past and bringing the hope of the future into the present, that everything Martha does here is correct. It's just not complete. All right, everything she does here is correct. It's just not complete. And so we'll start with this. Martha does three things as she gets to Jesus. One, she immediately brings up the past. It's the first thing out of her mouth. It's a legitimate question. If you had been here, my brother would not die. Now, that may or may not be true, right? If you would have come, he would have lived. This is the first thing out of her mouth. And listen, it's easy for us to read the Bible backwards. It's really different to put yourself in this space. And so let me kind of unpack the space for you. You don't have to be an expert in first century history or anything like that to just stop for a second and imagine what it would have been like for two sisters to try to nurse their dying brother to health while waiting on Jesus to get there, only to see Jesus no-show. Right? There's no IC unit, there's no electricity, they're trying to keep their brother alive. I don't know if you've been around death. Death is always ugly. Dignity always goes out the window. There's a gasping for air, a trying to breathe that becomes laborious and then feels like it's impossible, then gets replaced with a gurgle until you die. Mary, Martha had watched their brother, and we don't know what kind of illness this is. We get no indication that he's an old man or so you've got a man who is losing his life to sickness, and two sisters who try to keep him alive until Jesus can get there. And Jesus no-shows, and he dies. Martha, looking to the past, says, if you would have been here, he would have lived. Now, there's nothing wrong with looking to the past. In fact, repeatedly throughout the scriptures, we're commanded for there to be remembrance in us, to remember God's faithfulness, to remember those times God has been good and gracious, to even remember those valleys in which God has led us through those valleys. And so although Martha is doing what is correct to remember, she's not doing it in a way that I would call it being complete. And so let me lay this before you. I know what we're doing here. And so let me just, there are some of you, this is your past is a real kind of hang up on the truth of who God is and the truth of who Christ is. It's a difficult question. I never want to shy away from the question, how can God be loving and me have experienced what I experienced in my past? For many of us, there's this thing behind us that defined us. It's become a type of identity for us, and we can't reconcile a loving God with what's behind us. One, we can't reconcile that he would love us because of what we've done, and we certainly can't reconcile him being loving when we consider what has occurred to us. And so if there's any kind of abuse in your background, if there's any kind of neglect in your background, if there's any type of other darkness in your background, the question has to be in there, where were you? If you're good, where were you? If you're kind, where were you? If you are for me and not against me, where were you? And this is a question that Martha's asking. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, the reason we miss that so often is because if you're a church person, you know how this story ends, right? But in this moment, nobody knows how this ends. People are wailing, there's mourning, there's sackcloth and ashes. Mary's still sitting in the house where she's been for days. Refuses to come out even for Jesus. And then from there, she moves right from that, where were you, Jesus, to what I'll just call a religious platitude. All right, and what we see in Martha's present state, and you might think that I'm being too hard on her. I don't think I am. I'll show you a little bit later why. But verse 22, she says this. So she goes, where were you? If you'd have been here, this wouldn't have happened. You could have kept him from dying. Period. But, verse 23, even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Now, I'm going to argue that this is a spiritual platitude, that this is what she knows she's supposed to say, but deep down inside doesn't believe it. All right, this is a type of weak sauce, inch deep bumper sticker theology that has not really emboldened her faith, but rather become just something she knows she's supposed to say. So just so we can all feel safe together, how many of you have found there are seasons where you've just got kind of spiritual platitudes? You've got these sentences that you'll just say, and the depth of those and the reality of those and really nestled in your heart, right? I mean, you see, anytime you see a bumper sticker, that's what that is. If you're driving past a car and it says the bread of life never gets stale, that's what I'm talking about, right? It's this, oh, that's cute. It happens all the time on Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest, where these little kind of spiritualized memes, right? That they're there. It's true. There's nothing non-true about it, nothing untrue about it. But it's not that the person has embraced it or really submitted to the truth, but rather that sounds good. Let me say it. This happens all the time, and this is where Martha finds herself. She says, where were you? Had you been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give to you. And then Jesus says, your brother will rise. And then what's Martha's response? Martha's response is to head deep into the future. Right? So let's look at her response in verse 24. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Now, here we've got Martha looking back on her past. All right, if you would have been here in about an inch deep of spiritual platitudes, all right, but I know years and years and years from now, on the last day, he'll rise deep into her future. That's where her hope lies. Now, remember what we're talking about. We're saying that Jesus, being the resurrection and the life, means that the past is going to start to be untangled and the hope of our future is going to be begin to seep into the present, however we've walked in this room today. Well, Jesus is going to do that with a bold, difficult statement. The statement is difficult because it removes any notion that he might just merely be a good moral teacher. All right, it's sentences like the one we're about to read where Jesus presents himself as the solution to a problem that eradicates or removes from any of us the ability to say he was a great teacher, right? Because he's not claiming to be a great teacher. He's not even teaching a lesson. He's saying, no, I'm the solution to the problem. So let's look at that in verse 25. She says, I know he will rise on the last day. Jesus steps in. No. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Now that's a problem if you want to just say Jesus is a good teacher. Because Jesus didn't pull her aside and say, one day God is going to accomplish these things. And he doesn't do that. He submits himself as the solution. No, Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. The resurrection and life isn't some future event. It's here now, available to you, to all. Jesus is saying, I am the solution to this problem of broken pasts, shallow religious platitudes, and a future hope that's tens of thousands of years away. He says, I am the resurrection, that all who believe in me will not die, not the eternal death. Even though they die, they will live.